All right, AP Environmental, we're going to finish up topic 6.3 to 6.5 today. This has kind of been an ongoing lecture series, parts 1, 2, and 3, all dealing with fossil fuels. So we're going to finish it up with part 3 today, which takes us into our last fossil fuel. We've already talked about coal, oil, and even we talked about oil shale and tar sands as well. But natural gas is the last fossil fuel type that we're going to talk about. Now, the one thing I suppose that separates natural gas from the other fossil fuels is that it's a gas, right? Coal is a solid, oil is a liquid, natural gas is a gaseous fossil fuel. So I do want us to know a little bit here. This picture, for example, is kind of showing us, how we would access natural gas or where natural gas would be found. Here on the surface, for example, you've got your oil derrick here. You've got your oil, or you've got your oil pump, that's drilling down to access oil. And again, it's drilling down, through layers and layers of rock. Now, the oil, the crude oil that's underneath the surface, right above that crude oil, you'll notice right here this kind of orangish color. All right, that's where the natural gas is found. The natural gas is typically found right above the crude oil deposits. So, as they're drilling for oil, they're going to kind of, indirectly be able to access that natural gas or those natural gas deposits. Now, natural gas is basically methane. It's a hydrocarbon. That's basically what it is. So whenever we access that natural gas, we're basically just pulling methane gas from under the Earth's surface and bringing it up, to the surface. Now, extracting it is kind of similar to extracting oil, but again, it's in the gaseous state. It's not in the liquid state. Now, what do we use natural gas for? There's several things that we use it for. Number one, we can actually use it to help generate electricity. We can be used as sort of an alternative to coal. Instead of, for example, burning coal to produce heat, you can, burn natural gas to produce heat. So, as long as that turbine spins, it really doesn't matter where the heat source comes from, but natural gas can be an alternative to coal. It's also used to manufacture fertilizers. A lot of methane gas, a lot of natural gas is used during the process of fertilizer manufacturing. So you can imagine, we use a lot of fertilizer in this country. So we're going to use a lot of natural gas to make that fertilizer. It's also used in our homes. I mean, go home today, after school, your stove at your house most likely runs on natural gas. Some people have electric stoves, but most people probably it runs on natural gas. There's like a little burner on the top of your stove. You turn the stove on and the flame comes on, right? Well, that flame is coming from burning natural gas. The heaters in our home, hot water heaters in our home, our clothes dryers, a lot of these appliances, again, use natural gas in order to work. So a lot of things in our daily lives that we depend on, we need natural gas for those things. All right, so make sure we understand some of the uses. Now, some advantage of natural gas in comparison to other fossil fuels. One of the things that's kind of I guess, an advantage compared to coal and oil is natural gas is a very clean fuel. Now, by clean, what I mean by that is there's very few, if any, impurities, things like sulfur and mercury and lead, things that we've talked about in class before. So when we burn natural gas, those things aren't put into the atmosphere. Now, I will say this, whenever we burn a hydrocarbon, I don't care if it's methane or propane or butane or whatever it is, if you burn a hydrocarbon, you are going to emit carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. But when we burn natural gas, there is less carbon dioxide that's produced compared to coal or oil. So as far as a fuel, especially a fossil fuel, I suppose natural gas has some advantages there over coal and also over oil. Okay, so know those. Now, some of the disadvantages. Um, Again, I've already mentioned this, but whenever you burn natural gas, any fossil fuel, you will be getting carbon dioxide. You will get that combustion reaction. You will get CO2 that gets produced. So, in that aspect, it's not good. Even though there's less CO2 than, let's say, burning coal or oil, this is still not a good thing. Now, the other thing about natural gas, which really makes it kind of a disadvantage, is the actual gas itself. If we burn the methane, okay, or if we burn the natural gas, then it's going to produce CO2. But if we don't burn it and it actually leaks into the atmosphere, the methane gas itself is a greenhouse gas. So really, it's not good if you burn it. It's also not good if you don't burn it. I mean, if it leaks out of the ground, if there's, let's say, a natural gas pipe that breaks and it leaks out into the atmosphere, natural gas is actually a worse greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. So it's really not a good thing to let leak up into the air. Now, one of the things about natural gas is that we've been drilling for it more and more and more in recent years. We're actually allowing a lot of it to leak into the atmosphere, either by accident or if there's some type of a mistake, let's say during the extraction process or the transportation process, then that could leak a lot of methane gas into the atmosphere before we even get a chance to burn it. So understand that there is some issues with natural gas. We don't really want to burn a lot of it because it does produce carbon dioxide, but we also don't want to let the gas itself escape into the atmosphere. So that's another bad thing. All right. Now, how we go about accessing natural gas is a process that I want us to understand. It's a process called fracking. They also call it hydraulic fracturing. It's the same thing. It's fracking. What fracking basically is a method that we use to extract the gas from the ground. Right? A lot of times, I'm going to go back to this picture here that I mentioned earlier. A lot of times the gas itself is not necessarily found in a nice little pool like this under the ground. Sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, the gas is actually trapped inside of rock and it needs to be kind of broken free so that we can access it. Now, fracking is the process of how we do that. Now, the good thing, I guess, with fracking is it does create a lot of jobs. There's lots of fracking wells in our country. A lot of people work for the fracking industry. Their jobs are to go out there and drill for this natural gas. So it does create a lot of jobs. It also makes us less dependent on foreign fossil fuels. So if we can get the natural gas within our own country, we don't have to depend on that natural gas from, let's say, Russia or Saudi Arabia or some other country. And then finally, this process of fracking just allows us to get natural gas better than we ever have before. This is a relatively new technology, fracking. I mean, when I say relatively new, like maybe in the last 30, 40 years or so, like 100, 200 years ago, we were never fracking for natural gas. But now we have this technology that allows us to do this. So it allows us to get access to these gases more than we ever have before. So in that aspect, again, it's a good thing. Now, when it comes to fracking, right, this is kind of what happens. All right, if you look at this picture here, down here in the soil is where all the natural gas is. And if you guys might remember our soil profiles, remember like your O horizon, your A horizon, all that stuff, right? A lot of that natural gas is all the way down in that parent material, all of that rock, all that bedrock, that sea horizon, it's all down there. So, in order to access all of that gas, we have to drill and break and crack all of that rock open. So, how do we do that? Well, here's what we do: we drill down, okay, hundreds of feet. And it's usually this, if you look at this shape here, it almost has sort of like an L shape to it. This is actually how they do the drill. They'll drill down and then they'll like drill at like a 45-degree angle, okay? Or I should say a 90-degree angle, not 45 degree, 90-degree angle. So, they'll drill down like in this angle. And then what they do is they pump this full of three things: water, a tremendous amount of water, mind you, sand, and also chemicals. We'll come back to the chemical part in a second. But I want to just look at the water, for example. It says here 200 trucks of water are used for each well. There are thousands of these wells in our country. Every single one of them, 35,000 wells. And this statistic might be a little bit old. It might be closer to like 40 or 45,000 now. But I mean, we use 70 to 140 billion gallons of water to frack all of those wells. I mean, this is a tremendous amount. Now, where does that water come from? It comes from local waterways. It could come from aquifers like the Ogallala Aquifer. A lot of fracking wells are out west, so they get a lot of that fracking water from aquifers. But I mean, there's a tremendous amount of water that's used. Now, the sand sometimes they'll use sand, sometimes they'll use, they call it ceramic beads. They're like little ceramic granules. They call those things proppants. What proppants are is when they pump all this stuff down, it's under a tremendous amount of pressure, and it forces and it cracks all of the rock, and it lets the gas escape. Well, the proppants, the sand and these ceramic beads, they get into these little cracks and crevices, and they keep the rock open, which allows the gas to get out, and then we can access it and we can pump it back up. Now, a lot of these chemicals that are used to help break and fracture the rock, a lot of those chemicals are not good. Some of those things cause cancer, some are carcinogenic. They can get into groundwater supplies, they can get into the soil. I mean, there can be a lot of pollution because of the chemical aspect of what gets pumped down these wells. Here's kind of another picture showing us kind of the same thing. Here's your fracking well here. And you'll notice where this well is. Okay, so again, they're drilling, they pump it full of water and proppants and chemicals. But you'll notice what's right above where they're fracking at. Right above it might be an aquifer. So let's say, for example, right here, all this blue here, this is fresh water that, let's say, a farmer can pump up for irrigation, or we can use for drinking water. Well, if that water is right above where you're fracking, and you're breaking all of this rock and you're pumping it full of chemicals, well, one thing that could happen is the chemicals can get into the water. So that's toxic pollution right there. Another thing is the natural gas can actually get into the water. You're actually pumping the natural gas up, but some of that gas can actually get into the water supply, and that wouldn't be very good. I'm going to show you guys a video um, today or tomorrow, and they're going to show you what happens when natural gas gets into drinking water. They have this picture, or they have this video of this guy in his house, and he turns on his faucet, and he turns the faucet on and lets the water come out, and he takes a lighter and he lights his water on fire because there's natural gas that's leaking into his water supply from a nearby fracking well. I mean, so I mean, imagine that, like going home today, turning on your water faucet and lighting a lighter and being able to light your water on fire. Probably not something that you would want to drink. Okay, so some of the disadvantages of fracking. I just mentioned this. There's a tremendous amount of water that's used. So again, there's only so much fresh water on our planet that can deplete local water supplies. Methane, which is the gas that the natural gas is made of, a lot of that can actually leak. During drilling, that can leak up into the atmosphere. It can leak into water. Again, that's a greenhouse gas, so we don't want that going up into the air. Fracking chemicals can pollute the soil. It can render the soil useless. Again, that's soil degradation. Again, the fracking chemicals can contaminate water supplies. I mentioned this. Now, one thing about these fracking chemicals, which is kind of interesting, besides that they're like carcinogenic and they cause a bunch of human health problems, one of the things that these fracking companies get away with is by law, they don't have to list all of the chemicals that they use in their fracking fluid. And the reason why they don't have to do that is the same reason why Kentucky Fried Chicken does not have to relinquish what their recipe is for their chicken. Because if Kentucky Fried Chicken just let their recipe out, then the whole world would know how to make their chicken. And guess what would happen to the Kentucky Fried Chicken business? Their business would probably lose millions of dollars because people would be making the chicken at home instead of going to their store and buying it. Well, these fracking companies, by law, do not have to give their recipe for their fracking fluid because if they did, other companies could steal that recipe and they can use that fracking fluid to open their own fracking business and take money away from other companies. So fracking companies have like a little loophole. They go out and they frack, the rock and extract the gas, and then a bunch of people get sick, and then nobody knows why they're getting sick, and people can't prove that the fracking companies put these chemicals into the water because by law they don't have to disclose what's actually in their fluid. So it's kind of crazy, but the movie that we're going to watch this week will kind of get into that a little bit more in detail. Now, here's one more thing that fracking can cause. It can cause earthquakes. Anytime we are breaking through, bedrock and parent material and we're drilling deep under the Earth's surface, that could cause, tectonic plate movement. And they've actually had earthquakes, kind of lower magnitude earthquakes, actually get caused because of fracking. All right. So make sure we understand some of those disadvantages with fracking, but there's a big demand for natural gas in this country. I mean, we like going home to a nice warm house, right? And being able to, have a hot water heater so we can take a hot shower and all these things. Well, that all comes from natural gas. So how do we get that gas? We get it through fracking for the most part. So as long as there's a demand for it, there's going to be a demand for fracking. All right, guys, that's it for me. Have a good day. I will see you. Take care.